This video may not be popular with some estate agents out there, but unfortunately estate agents are some of the least trusted professionals in the UK. A study found that only 1% of people consider the estate agency as a trustworthy profession. Now this means that estate agencies are viewed as less trustworthy than as lawyers, but also traffic wardens, which means that estate agents are on the same level as some of society's most notorious white-collar figures, bankers. Now, to be clear, there are ethical agents out there that genuinely care about their landlords. However, there are other agents out there that use tactics that simply do not serve property professionals. And so I'm going to call them out. I know it's not going to be popular. I'm going to get a lot of criticism, but someone has to call them out and bring this attention to these issues. So stay tuned. So first up, let's start off with one of the most common tactics that estate agency have, which is winning your rental property listing. And they do this by way of a high valuation, an unrealistic valuation. And the best way I can share this is with a story of James, a buy-to-let investor who recently acquired a buy-to-let property and was keen to start getting some rental income. Understandably and sensible, of course, he's invited 3 agents to view the property and give him a valuation. Agent number 1 has come in, is not very familiar with the area, but most of all doesn't specialize in lettings. Estate agency with hundreds of listings and has come in with a below market value. From James' perspective, he feels this corporate agent and not really interested in helping a landlord like James, who has one property as opposed to a landlord who has a portfolio of property and just wants to get it out of the way. Fair enough. Then comes in agent number 2, who has an understanding of the market, specializes in lettings, and has come in at market value, has provided James with some solid proof of comparables. Now, if you're not familiar with what comparables are, they are evidence of properties that are like James in every way, of course, as close as possible. So you have to compare apples with apples and not with oranges. As an example, you can have properties in the same region, but if the property is smaller, if the condition of the property is different, all of these things have to take into consideration. James looks at the rental price and thinks, okay, yeah, fair enough. And then comes agent number 3, a corporate agent. This agent has provided a high valuation, however, hasn't provided any solid evidence as to how they're going to achieve this, and yet still manages to promise James that they can achieve this rental price. Although things don't quite add up to James is really enticed by this high price and says that, you know, if we can really achieve this, then this is something that's going to benefit him in the long term, and ultimately gives in and decides to go with agent number 3. However, after a couple of weeks with no offers, let alone any viewings, James starts to get worried, especially as he has that agent calling him every week to reduce the price. James ends up receiving a rental price below what the second agent had initially provided. How did this happen? Well, after several weeks of being on the line and potential tenants seeing that property online and also seeing a reduction in price, tenants ended up thinking that there was something wrong with the property. And ultimately a tenant did make an offer and it ended up being below the price what the second agent had provided in the first place. A high valuation, especially that has no real evidence, as in this case with James, can end up having a detrimental impact on the price that you achieve. And the second tactic that estate agents use against landlords is low fees, at least initially. And there are a few challenges with this. Now, the first thing is it will raise a red flag if that initial fee is substantially different to what the market rate is. And it could be they're cutting corners in several fronts. So the first thing is that if your property isn't renting, it could be for 3 main reasons. One of them we already talked about, that is price. But then there are other 2, which is presentation of your property and it is exposure. And potentially with a low fee of the agent, they could be compromising on both, which would be detrimental to the marketing of your property. And you want to look at those terms and conditions, because you may have a set price for the property management and yet you may have different prices for each and every other service that they provide, which is absolutely fine as long as it's on the terms and conditions and you're aware of it. Some other agents may give you a high management fee, but everything's included, and it's good to know exactly what you're getting. If you're a landlord listening to this, then you definitely want to be aware of this tactic, which is rent guarantee. Because what they do is they promise you the world, and they promise you that they're going to guarantee you a rent for a number of years. But the truth is, and especially if you've been in rental property for some time, you probably know that when HMO became so popular and student accommodation, probably around about 8 or 9 years ago, this was something that was very popular in that sector. And what happened was, when the market turned, and it always turns, market shift, that's exactly what they do. What we found was a lot of these companies just giving those properties back to these landlords with a lot of void periods and ran away with the money. Now, what we're seeing at the moment is a similar thing, but with service accommodation. And again, the market shifts. And when it does shift, you may end up with a property where a company had promised you a guarantee, but because they can't find anyone or regulations changes, they are changing, you'll end up with that property again with your hands with a whole load of problems, because a lot of these companies don't even comply with most of the regulations. So if you're going to do anything like that, you're probably best off doing it with a reputable agency, but still you want to read those terms and conditions as to what that rent guarantee entails. I've got to ask you for a favor. If you're finding this video helpful, smash that like button. It really motivates me in pushing more of these videos out there for you. And this next one is a big one, which is markups on maintenance and repair, which isn't uncommon with a estate agency. But what you do want to know is exactly how much that is, or markups on the percentage of whatever they're getting when they get repairs out there for you. But most importantly, those major repairs or refurbishment, you want to make sure that that is clear on the contract, because most agents will add a 10 or 12% if they're having to go to the property and actually oversee any of those major works, which is understandable. But again, it depends on those terms and conditions that you have there and how long those major works are going to go for, because you may want to arrange these works yourself to avoid any of these extra fees. And this next one is quite sneaky. I was shocked when I heard about it myself, and I've been in the industry for more than 20 years. So this is reletting the property without your prior consent. So let me explain. You have an agent and you instruct that agent, and the agent finds you a tenant for a period of 24 months with a 12-month break clause. Now, what's happened is that somewhere along the line, the tenant has said, you know what, I'm leaving. And the agent doesn't even let you know. The agent, what they do is they go and relet the property without your knowledge and your consent. And even maybe you had a really bad experience with that agent and you were thinking, well, actually, I'm not going to use this agent next time round. Or maybe you had different plans with the property. And before you know it, you have another tenant for another 2 years. Shocking, I know, and it happens. That's why it's so important that your terms and conditions have it very specific that any reletting of the property can only happen with your prior consent. Otherwise, you may end up with a boy band in the property for another 2 or 3 years and you didn't even know about it. This tactic that estate agents use is an important one for landlords to be aware of. Get this wrong and it can wipe out profitability for a year or even 2. And that is the lack of transparency for referencing for specific tenants. Now, this most often happens when landlords instruct multiple agents. So let me share with you a story of Lucy, a buy-to-let investor and landlord. So she got notice of her tenants leaving. It was a short notice. She was somewhat nervous. So she decided to hire 3 agents for the same listing, because in her mind, she thought, let me create some competition. This way, I'm going to get potentially a better quality tenant because I have more to choose from. I'll also have a better price because there's competition against tenants, and also in a quicker time frame. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Agents, of course, love competition, and yet they always want to win by whatever means. Now, of course, not all agents, but most agents for sure want to make the commission and don't want to lose out. And therefore, what that ends up happening is creating competition amongst agents because they want to be the first ones, not necessarily bringing the best possible tenant, but being the first ones to be able to win the deal. And a lot of them, even if there are red flags during the pre-qualification of the tenant, during the viewing, as long as they can secure that tenant, they kind of ignore that, are not transparent with the landlords that, there's something not quite right with the tenants. And even throughout the referencing process, they don't provide the full information. And ultimately, the landlord ends up having a challenging tenant when the agent knew about it all along. And it was only because that agent, of course, wanted to win the deal. So what you do want to, of course, create is tenant competition. So you're able to get the best possible rental price market value, dare I say above. And with the potential removal of Section 21, the no fault eviction, this is the number one mistake that landlords should be avoiding. And to find out more on how to avoid it, make sure you check out my video. The link will be on the description, but you also can click above. And this brings us to automatic renewals and fee increases. Now with estate agents, when they find you a tenant, it's not uncommon to have a renewal every year, which is fair for both parties. However, what I've also heard about is these renewals becoming automatic without the consent of the landlord, but even worse still, that the fee increases together with that renewal. Now that fee shouldn't increase. If anything, it should decrease, meaning that it should be less than what you actually paid for that initial letting fee, but certainly not increase in any way. So reading your terms and conditions in terms of your consent for those renewals, but also knowing exactly what you're paying is going to be crucial. With all that said, we are witnessing an end of an era when it comes to the letting industry. Right now, when it comes to regulations in the letting sector, we can see that there are over 170 legislations, regulations, and with the Renters' Rights Bill coming into place at some point in the next few months, that's going to, of course, increase. Therefore, landlords are turning more and more to estate agents for guidance to be able to manage their property. But as I said before, there are professional, ethical, and trustworthy agents out there, in the same way where there are good landlords and there are bad landlords. But although this video gives you some kind of steps to avoid the tactics that some unethical agents have out there, make sure you download the link on the description to download the guide on how to choose an agent. But also, most importantly, if you are actively looking for an agent, we've built a solid network of agents and we can guide you in the right direction. The link is also on the description.